When Miss Emily Grierson passed away, the entire town attended her funeral. The man attended with a sense of respectful affection for what was considered a fallen monument, while the women were mostly driven by curiosity to explore the inside of her house, a place unseen by anyone except an old man servant who served as a both gardener and cook for the past decade. Her residence, once an elegant, white, squarish frame house adorned with cupolas and spires in the style of the 70s, stood as the last remnant on a street that had lost its former prestige to encroaching garages and cotton gins, surrounded by cotton wagons and gas-line pumps. Miss Emily's house became an eyesore among eyesores, stubbornly displaying its decay. In life, Miss Emily was a tradition and a care for the town, rooted in an hereditary obligation dating back to 1894. Colonel Sartoris, the mayor at that time, had exempted her from taxes, a practice that continued even after his death. The official explanation, concocted by Colonel Sartoris, claimed that Miss Emily's father had lent money to the town, and this unique arrangement served as a form of repayment, while the next generation of leaders found the system dissatisfying. Attempts to collect taxes met with silence and eventually a note asserting that Miss Emily no longer went out at all. Faced with her reclusive nature, the town held a special meeting, and a deputation approached her home, a place untouched by visitors for years. Guided by the old Negro servant through a dim, dusty, and disused hall, they entered a parlor that bore witness to the passage of time. It was furnished in heavy, leather-covered furniture. When the Negro opened the blinds of one window, they could see that the leather was cracked, and when they sat down, a faint dust arose sluggishly about their thighs, spinning with slow motes in the single sun ray. On a tarnished gilt easel before the fireplace stood a crayon portrait of Miss Emily's father. They rose when she entered, a small, fat woman in black, with a thin gold chain descending to her waist and vanishing into her belt, leaning on an ebony cane with a tarnished gold head. Her skeleton was small and spare. Perhaps that was why what would have been merely plumpness in another was so vested in her. She looked bloated, like a body long submerged in motionless water, and of that pallid pool. Her eyes, lost in the fatty ridge of her face, looked like two small pieces of coal pressed into a lump of dough as they moved from one face to another while the visitors stated their errand. She did not ask them to sit. She just stood in the door and listened quietly until the spokesman came to a stumbling halt. So she vanquished them, horse and foot, just as she had vanquished their fathers 30 years before about the smell. That was 2 years after her father's death, and a short time after her sweetheart, the one we believe would marry her, had deserted her. After her father's death, she went out very little. After her sweetheart went away, people hardly saw her at all. A few of the ladies had the temerity to call, but were not received, and the only sign of life about the place was the negro man, a young man then, going in and out with the market basket, just as if a man, any man, could keep a kitchen properly, the lady said. so they were not surprised when the smell developed. It was another link between the grass teeming world and the high and mighty Griersons. A neighbor, a woman, complained to the major, Judge Stevens, 80 years old.
The mayor told the lady what she wanted him to do about it. The woman continued to complain, and Judge Stevens told her that the problem was probably due to a rat or snake that the black man had killed in Miss Emily's backyard. The next day, the mayor received more complaints, this time from a man who needed something done about it. Therefore, the same night, the conciliars met to talk about the case and decided to forget it for reason of etiquette. So the next night, after midnight, four men crossed Miss Emily's lawn and prowled around the house like thieves, snooping along the base of the brick and into the basement openings. They broke the basement door and sprayed lime there, and in all the old buildings. As they crossed the lawn again, they saw Miss Emily through the light behind her, sat down, and her upright torso motionless looked like of an idol. The men slowly crept across the grass to get out of there, and 1 or 2 weeks later, the smell disappeared. People began to feel really sorry for her, and they remembered how old Wyatt, her great aunt, had gone completely crazy for staying alone. We also believe that the Griersons kept a little too high for what they really were. None of the young men were good enough for Miss Emily. So, when she reached 30 and she was still single, we weren't exactly pleased, but vindicated. Even with the madness in the family, she wouldn't have turned down all her opportunities if they had actually materialized. When his father died, she realized that the house was all he had left, and in a way, people were happy. At last, they felt pity for Miss Emily. Being left alone and poor, she had humanized. The day after his death, all the ladies offered condolence and help, as is our custom. Miss Emily met them at the door, with no trace of pain on her face. She told them that her father was not dead, and did the same for 3 days, with the ministers calling her and the doctors trying to persuade her to allow them to dispose of the body. Just as they were about to resort to love and force, she collapsed, and her father was quickly buried. We didn't say that he was crazy then. We thought we had to. We remember all the young men that his father had pushed away, and we knew that without anything else, he would have to hold on to what he had stolen, as people will. She was sick for a long time. When we saw her again, he cut her hair, looked like a girl, kind of the angels in the colored church windows. The city had just left contracts to pave the sidewalks, and in the summer, after the death of his father, began work. The construction company came with blocks and woods and machinery, and a foreman named Homer Barron. A Yankee, a big, dark, smart man with a big voice and eyes lighter than his face. The little boys followed him in groups to hear him curse the blacks, and the blacks singing in time for the rise or fall of the spies. His song met everyone in the city. Homer Baron was very popular, and people gathered around him. That's when we started seeing him and Miss Emily together on Sunday afternoons. At first, we were glad that Miss Emily would have an interest, because all the ladies said, of course, a Grierson would not seriously think of an ordinary, a day laborer. But there were still others, other people, who said that even pain could not make a true lady forget nobility without calling first nobility. They just said, poor Emily, her relatives should come to her. She had some relatives in Alabama, but years ago, his father had quarreled with them over the property of the crazy old Wyatt, and there was no communication between the two families. They weren't even introduced at the funeral. As soon as she heard the whispers of the elders, she held her head high enough as she demanded more than ever the recognition of her dignity as the last Grierson, as if she had wanted that touch of worldliness to reaffirm her impermeability, like when she bought a rat poison, arsenic. That was more than a year after they started saying, poor Emily, and while the two cousins visited her. I want some poison, she told the pharmacist. She was over 30 then, still a mild woman, though thinner than usual. With coal black eyes, she asked for rat poison, but she wanted the best of all, no matter what kind.
The next day, among whisper and short gestures, we all agree on another prediction. She's going to kill herself, we affirmed, convincing that it will be for the best. When Emily began to frequent Elmer Barron, the opinion changed. She will marry him, we declared, though persistent, however, for Homer, known for his preference for male companionship and his penchant for drinking with the young men at the Elks Club, didn't seem the kind of man amenable to marriage. Still, we will whisper with sympathy. He was still talking into it as we watched the couple on Sunday afternoons behind the trellises. Town gossip grew, leading to intervention of a ministers and eventually the return of Emily's family with the expectation of a marriage. The accusations of a man's grooming set a complete set of men's clothing confirmed or conjecture, filling us with joy of the new chapters in Emily's life, especially as her cousin proved to be even more rooted in the Wilson tradition than she herself was. So, we were not surprised when Helmer Baron, after the streets were already quite finished, disappeared within a trance. Although we were yearning for a pretty revelations, we assumed he had left to prepare for Miss Emily's arrival, or perhaps to free himself from the cousins. We are accomplices in a secret conspiracy, aliens of Emily in her attempt to outwit the cousins. After They left. Homer returned to town, but his entrance through their kitchen door was the last we saw him. Emily became elusive, and although her old blood servant continued his comings and goings, the front door remained locked for nearly 6 months. When Emily reappeared, she had gained weight and her hair was turning gray. She maintained that vigorous trait until her death at 74, and the front door was forever sealed, resisting any outside interference with the servant aging in front of it, in Emily keeping her secrets in the quiet of her mysterious existence, which endured from generation to generation, beloved and inescapable and secret. Thus Miss Emily met her, and in the dark house, sick and lonely, with only the whisper of the old servant as witness to her decline, her death passed unnoticed by us villagers accustomed to Miss Emily's hermerism. The servant received the first condolences at the front door, and after the departure of the visitor, he disappeared, plunging into the gloom of the house. The two cousins arrived punctually for the funeral, celebrating with extravagance of a curious community. After the ceremony, a secret room hidden for 40 years was opened, releasing and inviting those that rebelled as space, decorating as if for a wedding, with details of a man lying of the bed in the posture and embrace, but the long and final surrender to sleep had transformed that smile into a gesture of resignation, inclusive even the grimace of love. What was left of him decomposed under the remains of the night camp had merged inseparably with the bed in which he was resting, and over him as well as over the adjoining pylon lay an uniform blanket of patient dust, waiting in silence. It was then that we noticed a sink in the second pylon, an empty space suggesting the presence of an absent head, lifting parapet, leaning forward, and inhaling the dried acrid scent of that subtle and visible dust, waking up in a long lock of iron gray hair, revealing the simultaneous presence and absence of Miss Emily in that place where time and death intertwined in a silence, evocative scent.